Okay, so you ready to dive into this whole UFO thing?
Always ready for a deep dive.
You shared some seriously fascinating stuff with me, all about this question that's been bugging humanity forever. Are we alone out there?
Yeah, it's a big one, isn't it?
We've got excerpts from this book, The Cosmic Crisis, by Daniel Gerretsen. He's a journalist, UFO researcher, the whole shebang, plus this interview you dug up with him, which is just, wow. And then your own notes tying it all back to, well, us, human psychology, technology, the good stuff.
Right, because it's not just about little green men, is it? It's about what this whole idea of alien life says about us, our hopes, our fears, the whole existential enchilada.
Exactly. And it gets really interesting when you start looking at the stories, the firsthand accounts, alongside the bigger questions, like what makes someone believe they've seen a UFO? What happens to them afterward?
It's like that story about Ted Branson, the Air Force pilot, back in '57. Talk about a close encounter.
Oh, yeah, during the Cold War.
Right in the thick of it.
Hmm.
He's patrolling near Guam, already on edge, Cold War tensions and all that. And then, boom, this blinding light appears out of nowhere, closing in on his plane faster than anything he's ever seen.
I'd freak out.
He thought it was a reflection at first, an easy mistake. But then this thing starts circling his plane, stays with him for 10 minutes. They even scrambled jets from a nearby base to intercept,
But nothing, right? It couldn't catch it.
too fast, too maneuverable. Whatever it was like nothing they'd ever seen before.
Mhm.
And this is where your observation about patterns really clicked for me. Because fast forward to 2004, and we have the Tic Tac UFO incident.
With Commander Fravor, right?
Exactly. Another highly skilled pilot, this time a Navy Top Gun, encountering something completely inexplicable.
And it's not just some blurry light in the sky this time. This is an object captured on multiple radar systems, infrared video by the Navy, doing things that would rip a normal aircraft apart, sudden stops, instant changes in direction, speeds that just shouldn't be possible.
It's like the laws of physics took a break for 15 minutes.
Seriously, it makes you wonder, what if these sightings are more than just, misidentified weather balloons or whatever?
Right, and it's not just the technology that's intriguing, it's the timing. Branson's sighting during the Cold War, Fravor's in a post-9/11 world. Makes you think, could these sightings be connected to something else, like maybe societal stress, a way for our collective anxieties to manifest?
No, that's a thought. And that leads us right to Daniel Gerretsen, the journalist and UFO researcher you've been digging into. What I find fascinating is that he approaches this whole thing not just as a researcher, but as a storyteller. He's not just looking for evidence, he's trying to understand the narrative, the impact.
Exactly, and his book, The Cosmic Crisis, dives right into that impact, specifically what happens if we ever get confirmation. He doesn't just ask, are we alone? He asks, are we ready?
Because let's be real, it's one thing to speculate about little green men, but a whole other ballgame if they actually show up on our doorstep. But before we get into all that, let's rewind a bit. We've got this massive universe, billions of galaxies, stars with planets that could potentially support life, right? So where is everybody? Enter the Fermi paradox, am I right?
The million, or rather, billion-dollar question. Physicist Enrico Fermi, he's the one who famously asked, where is everybody? If intelligent life is statistically probable, even somewhat common, shouldn't we have encountered some sign of it by now?
Right. It's almost eerie when you think about it. It's like you're home alone at night and you hear a noise. You know something's out there, but you have no idea what it is. So how do we explain this cosmic silence?
Well, Gerretsen explores a few different possibilities, each more mind-boggling than the last.
Hit me with them.
One is the Great Filter Theory.
Great filter. Okay.
It suggests that civilizations might be inherently self-destructive.
Self-destructive, huh?
Yeah, like maybe we wipe ourselves out before we reach a certain technological level. Think climate change, nuclear weapons, or some technology we haven't even dreamed up yet. It's a pretty sobering thought. We like to think we're making progress, but what if we're just one technological breakthrough away from destroying ourselves? Kind of makes you rethink that whole march of progress idea, doesn't it?
It really does.
And it kind of plays into that very human fear of the unknown, right? We see something we don't understand, and our first instinct is often fear. But there are other explanations for the Fermi paradox, too.
Okay, so if it's not self-destruction, what else could it be?
One idea is the zoo hypothesis. Picture this. Advanced civilizations are out there, but they're watching us from afar.
Like we're animals in a cosmic zoo.
Exactly. They know we're here, but they're choosing not to interfere, at least not directly. Maybe they're waiting for us to evolve a bit more technologically or ethically before making contact.
Okay, now that's both fascinating and a little creepy. Are we just some cosmic reality show for super intelligent beings. What happens if they get bored with the plot? Or, decide they want to switch things up?
It's a question Gerretsen actually grapples with in his book. He uses the analogy of anthropologists studying an isolated tribe in the Amazon. Even with the best intentions, even just observing can have unintended consequences when you're dealing with a culture you don't fully understand.
Right, like even the act of observing something changes it, just by being there. But okay, back to these Fermi paradox explanations. You mentioned there were a few.
Right, so there's another one, a bit more, well, unsettling. It's called the dark forest theory. And it comes from this science fiction novel, The Three-Body Problem, which, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it.
Adding it to the list. Dark forest theory, you said?
Yeah, imagine the universe as this vast, dark forest, and every civilization is like a hunter hiding in the shadows. Now, here's the catch. Every civilization is also terrified of being found, because out there, in the darkness, there might be other, more advanced civilizations that aren't so friendly.
So it's like, stay quiet, stay hidden, or they'll hear you.
Exactly. In the dark forest, silence equals survival. It's a pretty bleak outlook, I'll admit, but it does make you think about the potential risks of, shouting into the void. What if we're not ready for the answer? Or worse, what if the answer is something we don't want to hear?
Okay, that's officially enough existential dread for one day. Let's bring it back down to earth for a minute. We've been talking a lot about theory, but you've also shared some pretty compelling historical accounts of UFO sightings, like actual events people have reported. And it seems like things really picked up after World War II, right? Like that's when this whole UFO craze really took off.
Yeah, definitely saw an increase then. You've got the Kenneth Arnold sighting in 1947, which is kind of iconic. Pilot flying near Mount Rainier sees these 9 unidentified objects zipping around.
9.
9. And he describes them moving like saucers skipping on water, and bam, the term flying saucer is born.
So that's where that comes from.
Patient zero for the flying saucer craze. And after that, it seemed like everyone and their dog was seeing UFOs.
Well, maybe not everyone.
Okay, maybe not everyone. But there was definitely this surge in sightings, and not just from, unreliable witnesses. We're talking military pilots, radar operators, people with technical training who are used to identifying objects in the sky.
People whose job it is to know what's up there.
Right, and they couldn't explain what they were seeing. And this is during the Cold War, remember? So everyone's on edge, looking for Russian spies and secret weapons.
Which leads to the U.S. government creating Project Blue Book, right? That whole official investigation into UFOs.
Exactly, Project Blue Book.
Yeah.
It was this big attempt to, get to the bottom of things, separate fact from fiction. But it's always been controversial. Some people think it was more about debunking and downplaying potential threats than genuinely investigating.
It's like that old saying, trust but verify. Except in this case, it was more like deny and obfuscate. But even Project Blue Book couldn't explain everything, could they?
Nope. There were cases they just couldn't crack, even with all the resources at their disposal. And some of those cases, well, they involved multiple witnesses, radar data, even photographic evidence. It wasn't just some guy saying he saw a light in the sky.
Which brings us back to the Tic Tac UFO. Because it's not just a blurry photo or a story told secondhand. This is multiple Navy pilots, trained observers saying they saw something truly bizarre.
And they've got the radar data to back it up. Data that's been analyzed by experts who are still scratching their heads.
It's like, what are we supposed to make of that?
It's hard to say. But what's interesting is that this whole resurgence in UFO interest, especially with recent government disclosures and all, it's not just coming from the fringes anymore. We've got people like Senator Harry Reid pushing for transparency, journalists like George Knapp digging into government secrets.
And then there's Robert Bigelow. Talk about a fascinating character.
Yeah, the billionaire who bought Skinwalker Ranch.
That's the one. He made his fortune in real estate, but he's been into UFOs since he was a kid. He even founded his own research organization, the National Institute for Discovery Science.
It's clear that something is shifting, and it's not just the cultural conversation. There's a growing recognition that there are things out there, phenomena, experiences, maybe even intelligences that we just don't understand.
Which brings us to, I think, one of the most important aspects of this whole conversation, the psychological side of things. Because even if we can't explain every UFO sighting, there's something to be said for how we, as humans, process the unknown. And where Carl Jung comes in, right? The psychologist.
Absolutely. Jung's work is crucial here, especially his ideas about archetypes and the collective unconscious.
Like his concept of visionary rumors. I remember reading about that.
Exactly. Jung saw UFOs not necessarily as literal spacecraft, but as modern myths that reflect our deepest anxieties, our hopes, our fears about the unknown.
So it's not that little green men are actually landing in cornfields. It's that the idea of them, the anxieties we project onto them, the whole what if it can manifest in these, well, kind of tangible ways.
Precisely. It's like our subconscious is using this language of the unknown, this imagery of UFOs and aliens, to communicate with us, especially during times of crisis.
Which would explain why there was a surge in UFO sightings during the Cold War, right? When everyone was on edge about nuclear annihilation.
Exactly. Young noticed that. And you know what else? We saw a similar surge during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's like when the world feels uncertain, when our sense of normalcy is disrupted, we look to the sky, to the unknown, for answers or maybe just explanations.
Right, because we have to make sense of things even when we don't have all the information. It's like this basic human need to find patterns, connect the dots.
Exactly. And that's where things can get really interesting, but also potentially really messy.
Hmm?
Because when we're dealing with the unknown, our brains, they tend to, well, they fill in the blanks, right?
With our own biases, our preconceived notions.
Exactly. Our existing beliefs, our cultural baggage, even our fears. And suddenly, a strange light in the sky isn't just a strange light, it's a sign, a message, a threat.
And that brings us, I think, to one of the most controversial and frankly unsettling aspects of this whole UFO phenomenon, alien abductions.
Right, and this is where it gets really tricky. Gerretsen, in his book, he doesn't dismiss the experiences of those claiming abductions.
He doesn't.
No, in fact, he emphasizes the very real trauma that many of these individuals report, the psychological and emotional scars that can last for years.
Because, I mean, it's one thing to see a weird light in the sky, right? But to believe that you were actually taken aboard a spaceship, experimented on, that's a whole other level of, well, disturbing.
Absolutely. And it's not something to be taken lightly. But Gerretsen also encourages us to consider other explanations, things that might seem strange, but are actually grounded in, well, science, like sleep paralysis, for example. Have you ever experienced that?
I think so. It's that thing where you wake up and you can't move, right?
Exactly. It's terrifying. Your brain is awake, but your body's still asleep. You might see shadowy figures, feel like something's pressing down on you, even hear voices, and your brain, desperate to make sense of this, draws on whatever it can.
So cultural imagery, anxieties, like you were saying.
Exactly. So instead of a shadowy figure, your sleep-deprived brain goes, must be a large-eyed alien, and suddenly you've got yourself an abduction story.
Wow. Okay, so not every abduction story is necessarily aliens.
Right, and it's not about saying that people didn't experience something. It's about understanding the physiological and psychological mechanisms that might be at play. There are also things like hypnopompic and hypnagogic hallucinations, which sound like something out of Harry Potter, but are actually just those weird, dreamlike states between waking and sleeping that can produce really vivid, often unsettling imagery.
So what you're saying is our memories, especially when it comes to these really extraordinary events, they're not always as reliable as we think they are.
Exactly. Our brains are constantly rewriting the script, so to speak, filling in gaps, smoothing out inconsistencies, trying to make sense of things. It's why eyewitness testimony, even when given in good faith, can be notoriously unreliable.
So how do we separate fact from fiction when it comes to UFOs, I mean?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think the key is to approach these things with a healthy dose of skepticism, but also with a sense of curiosity and wonder. The universe is full of mysteries, and if we're not willing to explore the unknown, well, we'll never discover anything new.
Okay, so let's say, for argument's sake, that aliens are real and they decide to make contact, not just a few lights in the sky, but like a full-on take me to your leader kind of scenario.
Gerretsen seems pretty concerned about how prepared we are for that kind of revelation.
He is. He paints a pretty sobering picture, actually, of what could happen. Imagine a world leader going on TV and announcing that, yep, aliens are real and they're on their way. The potential for chaos is, well, significant. We're talking social unrest, economic collapse, maybe even violence, widespread panic.
People running through the streets convinced the sky is falling. It's not that far-fetched, honestly. Think about the reactions to Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast, or even the COVID-19 pandemic. People are susceptible to fear, especially when they're dealing with the unknown. And then there's the impact on organized religion. That's got to be huge.
Right. How do you reconcile centuries of doctrine, of belief, with the existence of being so far beyond our understanding?
That's one of the key points Gerretsen makes. We spend so much time debating if aliens exist that we haven't stopped to think about what happens if they ever show up. It's like we're so focused on the question that we haven't considered the answer.
And he's saying we need to start considering the answer, like, now.
Now, before it's too late. He even suggests that governments should be developing protocols, communication strategies, a whole playbook, essentially, for managing this kind of global event. Because, let's be honest, right now, we're not ready.
And it's not just about managing the initial shock, right? We're talking about long-term societal shifts. How do we process the knowledge that we're not alone, that there might be civilizations out there far more advanced than our own?
Exactly.
Yeah.
A whole new world. It would change everything. Our understanding of technology, religion, our place in the universe, everything. Like Gerretsen says, first contact wouldn't be the end of the story. It would be the beginning of a whole new chapter.
It's a lot to process. Exciting, terrifying, mind-blowing, all of it.
That pretty much sums it up, yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we've given our listeners plenty to chew on for today. Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that the universe is full of mysteries, and the search for answers, even if they're not the answers we expect, is ultimately a journey of self-discovery. The questions we ask, the way we choose to interpret the unknown, it reveals as much about us as it does about the cosmos. So keep asking those big questions, even the uncomfortable ones. Keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, keep an open mind.
Well said. It's been a fascinating conversation. And who knows, maybe one day we'll look back on this as the moment when humanity started taking this whole "are we alone" question seriously. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.